What's good, everybody? I'm your host, and my name is Professor Khalil Amani, and this is Khalil Amani's World 100. Welcome, everybody. This is part 19 of the Sodom and Gomorrah fuckery and fiasco. Oh yeah. I was trying to figure out if I was going to do this, but I'm here. Excuse those of you who are over here for knowledge, those of you who are here for the Sodom and Gomorrah story. Don't mind the fuckery that I do, that last video. That last video just shows you that, I can beef, I can go with the flow. But if you're here just for the knowledge, thank you. We're on part 19, y'all. It's so much to this Sodom and Gomorrah thing. Yes, it is. We're going to talk about those so-called male prostitutes, i.e. those Sodomites, that were all up in Jewish, Hebrew, Israelite affairs. We're going to talk about those male prostitutes, those sacred men who gave up sacred booty hole. They gave up sacred penis. All up in the Jewish, Hebrew, Israelite temples and whatnot. Oh yes, we are. We are not going to rush past this stuff. So welcome back. If this is your first time, there's 18 other parts you should check out. I'm just saying. Oh no, we're not going to skim past this. We're not going to treat these male homosexual so-called prostitutes. We're not going to treat it as an afterthought, as a bythought of Israelite history. Oh no. You see, when these so-called Israelites today, these so-called Hebrew Israelites today, they don't want to talk about how nasty their forefathers were. Oh, they will admit that they went into captivity and shit like that because they turned their backs on God. But they talk about it as an afterthought. They slide by it real easy. They give their sins, their iniquities and their abominations, they give that shit to Heisman. They let that shit slide off their tongues and they move on to talking about how bad everybody else is. Yeah. We're not going to do that over here. We're not going to soft pedal this shit over here. I said these Hebrew Israelites today, these so-called Israelites, while they will admit that their forefathers worshipped other gods from time to time, they don't want to get down into the mud, the muck and mire. They don't want to wallow in the pigsty of what their foreparents really did. They want to gloss over it like white folks like to gloss over slavery today. Yeah. You know how white folks, white folks can be very uncomfortable talking about what their foreparents did to the African captives and African slaves. White folks will admit, that their foreparents, their forefathers were not very nice towards humanity. But they will say that shit and they want to move on to the next. They don't want to have a deep-rooted conversation on the exact egregiousness and crimes against humanity that happened to the African. Similarly, these Hebrew Israelites today and these Israelites today, while admitting that they did not always follow the law of Yahweh, the law of Yahuwah, the law of Yahweh, the law of Yahweh, the law of Jehovah, whatever name for God you want to call, the Lord God of Israel. While they will admit that they didn't always follow the laws of God and that they strayed from their own God, they say that shit and teach that shit as an afterthought and as a very small thing. They talk about it as if it was a small thing. And even the Bible has a scripture in Ezekiel that says that these Israelites talk about what they did, their abominations and their sins, as if it were a small thing. Let me show it to you. Ezekiel 16th chapter. Yeah. Oh yeah, these Israelites, yeah, they'll say, yeah, we worshiped other gods, yeah, we went astray, yeah, we did a couple times, yeah, you know, no big deal, yeah, we did that. I said they don't want to give it no real, attention. They don't want to sink their teeth into what their forefathers did and really have an honest conversation about their own egregious behavior, crimes against their own God. I said these Israelites and Hebrew Israelites today, they talk about the sins of their forefathers as if it were a small thing. Thus, the book of Ezekiel would write, Ezekiel, the 16th chapter, verse 47. God is saying to the Israelites, yet hast thou not walked after the Sodomite and the goddess ways, nor done after their abominations, but as if that were a very little thing, thou was corrupted more than they in all thy ways. My God. Yeah, the Israelites, they ain't shit. They were more corrupted than the Sodomites and the Sumerians and the Babylonians and the Egyptians. It's right there. But then they will come out here and preach and talk about homosexuals going to hell and talk about their own crimes against God as if that were a very little thing. Khalil be knowing what he's talking about. You better believe that shit. Ezekiel 16 and 47 says that these Israelites, and you see it today, the way these Hebrew Israelites be on the highways and byways and the corners of streets and roads in every major city talking down to white people, disrespectful to white people, disrespectful to gays and lesbians and transgenders. But them motherfuckers were more corrupted than the people they talk about. And then when they admit that they were sinful, they talk about this shit as if it were a little thing. Ezekiel 16 and 47. Holla if you hear me. Holla if you hear me. All right. Even God calls them out. Even God calls out the Israelites for the worship of the goddess Asherah and her pole. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you got to go back and check the other to know what the pole is. Even God calls out the Israelites, the Hebrew Israelites, for being worse than the Sodomites, worse than the Egyptians, worse sinners than all these other nations. And then the Israelites, or the Jews, when they come to their senses and they admit that they were out of order and that they had a lot of sin themselves, they'll talk about it as if it were a little thing. They did it back then, and the so-called Israelites and Hebrew Israelites today talk about it today as though their past crimes against God were a very little thing. Oh, they want to harp. I'm talking about these Israelites today. They want to harp on homosexuals. They want to be known that homosexuals going to hell. But they don't tell. They don't preach in the cities. You don't hear ISUPK. You don't hear IUIC. You don't hear Sakari. You don't hear the Yahweh Ben Yahweh people. You don't hear GMS talk about the crimes that they committed against their own God. You never heard them teach that they were more wicked than the Sodomites. It was right here in Ezekiel 16:47. Have you ever heard any Hebrew Israelite or any Israelite teacher teach that once upon a time they were worse than the Sodomites? No, you haven't, and you ain't gonna hear it. Because they look at what they did. They look at their iniquities toward God, their sins toward God. They look at it as if it were a very little thing. They look at what they did as an afterthought. They look at what they did as dessert and not the full course meal. That's what they do. That's why it says in Ezekiel 16:47, yet you, Israel, hast thou not walked after the ways of the Israelite, of the Sodomites and Sumerians and Egyptians and Babylonians and Canaanites? Have you not walked after their ways? Nor have you not done their abominations? But thou, O Israel, you admit it, but you speak on it as if your sins, that was a very little thing. But God says, you, Israel, you were more corrupted, more than they in all thy ways. We're going to come back to this, but I just wanted to let you know, as I teach Sodom and Gomorrah, that these bastards, that these biblically and religio-historically insincere people known as Hebrew Israelites or Israelites, that they are loud on the street corners of American cities shouting down the white man as the devil, shouting down the homosexual as headed straight for the hellfire. But you won't hear them shout that we were gross sinners, that we, Israel, became more corrupted than the Sodomites. You won't hear that conversation, even though it's right from their Bible. But I want to move on now, and I want to talk about these beautiful men's. That was all up in Israelite religion, Israelite temples, Israelite society, and Israelite culture. Why did the Israelites of the olden days allow these sacred male so-called prostitutes? I'll explain why I say so-called prostitutes, because if you really knew the deal, they were not so-called prostitutes. They were members of the very elite and beautiful Canaanite religious complex and the Sodomite complex. Using words like prostitute, as I explained, like in part 16, 17, that's an ethnocentric bias. That is a word created by the Jews, by the Hebrews, by the Israelites themselves to describe other folks' religious practices. And outside of the Bible's polemic, outside of the Bible's argument, you won't find words like prostitute in any extra biblical literature. The writings of the Sumerians, the writings of the Egyptians, the writings of the Canaanites, the writings of the Sodomites, the writings of any other nation, they don't use the word prostitute because they did not view what they were doing as prostitution. So understand, when we do use the word prostitute, we are talking about an ethnocentric grammatical bias. You smell what I'm cooking? Now let's go back to Kings. They like to run over this stuff or don't even talk about it at all. We're not letting you off the hook like that. We're not letting you off the hook. Oh no. We're not letting you off the hook. These Sodomites, who were part of the Sodomite religion, who just happened to be of a homosexual persuasion, God, as I've said, God could have destroyed them way back during the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, when he claimed he was going to destroy the cities of the plain, which were Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboam and Zoar. But God didn't do that. God didn't do that. God allowed one of the 5 cities of the plain to escape with its life. The city of Zoar. You want to understand it? Go back. You got to go back. Sorry, not sorry. And since Zoar was allowed to flourish and proliferate and get magnified and multiply, their numbers grew and grew and grew. And so from the time of Abraham, Lot, and Sodom and Gomorrah, some 700 years elapse until Moses comes on the scene, and Moses has to address the Sodomites again. Not because they were homosexual, because they were a religious bunch. And after Moses dies, takes his ass up in the mountain and dies, Joshua takes the Israelites into the land of Canaan, where they encounter the goddess religion, the goddess Asherah, and her pole, her stripper pole. And they encounter the Sodomites, Baal, and all of their licentious and lasciviousness from the viewpoint of the Israelites. They recognize that the goddess and the Sodomite use sexual intercourse, fucking and sucking, as ritual and worship in the temples. And B times, straight away, right away, pew, the Israelites started engaging in Sodomite and goddess religion. But within the Sodomites, they had fine-looking men, beautiful men, men that was 24, 36, 36, 24, 36, with a winning hand, they would brick house. They had these beautiful, young, supple, strong, muscular men. Some of them were masculine in nature. Some of those men were feminine in nature. But they were very well kept together. They had their nails pedicured and manicured. Hair did, nails did, everything did. These young men, some were heterosexual, some were bisexual, some were homosexual. But the Israelites called them male temple prostitutes. You mean they were selling pussy or selling dick in the temple? The answer is no. That's why they weren't prostitutes. That's the language that the Israelites used. But they were sacred male consorts of sort. They were young men whose duty was to service, to give ass to Israelite and other nations, to give booty to them, as to pay homage to the deity Baal and the deity Asherah. They got on their hands and knees, doggy style, and allowed the members to penetrate and blow their backs out and run dick all up into their anus cavities. Or they would sling hot, heavy dick on Israelite men that wanted to feel the phallus, the strength of a man's penis in their rectum, as part of the service and worship of the deities. Don't you fall for this. All these Israelite men were straight. Hell to the no. Many of the Israelite men would go to the Asherah temples, the goddess temple, and go to the Sodomite temples to get their butts blown up. I'm talking masculine Israelite men. They don't teach this. I teach it like it is. There were Israelite women that went in those Goddess and Sodomite temples to get their vaginas blown the fuck out. There are Israelite men who went to those Goddess and Sodomite temples to suck cock from the back. I know I'm being a little gross, maybe even gratuitous with the sexual language. But people like to run over and gloss over what was going on, especially these Hebrew Israelites and these Israelites today. They want to gloss over the fact that they were sucking dick. These Israelites today, they want to gloss over that they were taking 8, 9, 10 inches of dick up their asses. They want to gloss over it while standing on the street corners of every city in America persecuting homosexuals as they went about their day-to-day lives. They don't want to talk about when they themselves were taking 8, 9, 10 inches of dick up their asses. They were sucking cock. They were letting temple, so-called male temple prostitutes bust nut in their face and all down their throats. I'm talking about the Israelites. I ain't lying, Junior. They don't want to talk about when they was doing it. I just stand on the corners. I think the next time I see IUIC here in Denver, and I go listen to them, I might have to stop them and ask them, respectfully. What do you say about the fact that once upon a time, your forefather was, the men were taking cocks up their asses and sucking dick and swallowing cum? Well, what do you say about that? Won't get no friends off of that conversation. But I want to talk about it. So let's go over here to the Kings again. 1 Kings 15. Starting with 22. And Judah, that's Israel, did evil in the sight of the Lord, And they, Judah or Israel, provoked him, God, to jealousy with their sins which they had committed above all that their fathers had done. Well, let's go on. For they, meaning Judah or Israel, also built them high places and images and groves. We now know that the King James Bible that I'm reading from, we now know that this word groves is a mistranslation, and it should say pole or Asherah pole or Asherah. It should not say groves. This is an outdated mistranslation. All other, the NIV and the Jerusalem Bible and other Bibles more up to date, they have not grove, they have Asherah or Asherah poles or poles as a more accurate translation for groves. But the Israelites built these. This is a statue. This is a relic of the goddess. It's a relic of the goddess worship. And they had these groves on every high hill, under every green tree. And there were also Sodomites in the land. And they did according to all the abominations of the nations which the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. And so King James said there were Sodomites in the land. This is a very inaccurate translation also. Because when you read it, you just say there was homosexuals in the land. Well, what do homosexuals have to do with with Judah and Israel building high places and images and groves? Can't you see that the Sodomites were a problem? Can't you see that if they talk about building high places and images and Asherah poles or groves, all religious imagery, and the next verse, they introduce Sodomites. Don't you understand that this is a religious problem, not a sexual problem? When they say, and there were Sodomites in the land, what does Sodomites, if we're talking about strictly homosexuals, what does it have to do with the verse before it, which talks about religion? Ritual and worship, high places, images and groves, or correctly, Asherah poles. And now you're talking about homosexuals? That shit don't make sense. That don't make sense to go from religious imagery, high places, images, and Asherah poles or groves, 3 religious images and icons, to talking about sexual preference. That alone lets you know that this is not talking about sexual preference or homosexuality. And the way we know it's not talking about it is when we look at the other translations, the other more accurate translations, and they don't even use the word Sodomites. Let me show you, man. For instance, when we go to the NIV, New International Version, we're talking about 1 Kings, not the 15th, but the 14th chapter, verse 24. When we go to this NIV and we read it, 1 Kings 14 again, and we read that same verse, verse 24, what does it say? See 24? It says, there were even male shrine prostitutes. It doesn't even use the word homosexual. A male shrine prostitute could be hetero or homo, which means that the Sodomites were hetero and they were homo. It doesn't tell you what sexual preference these males are. But when you read King James, You try to make Sodomites strictly homosexual, which some of them were. Some of them were indeed homosexual. But when you read newer, better translations, verse 24, Sodomites. Verse 24, male shrine prostitutes. And so, because it says they were male shrine prostitutes, that's open for any sexuality. You could be straight, hetero. You could be bi. You could be homo. Hell, you could be trans. You could be queer. You could be, whatever you want to be. It simply says they're males. And males can fuck women. And males can fuck men. It's a big difference between you reading Sodomite in old King James and your mind going straight to Faggotsville. You read Sodomite and your mind goes straight to men fucking men. And when you read the greater, newer translations, like the NIV, you see male shrine prostitutes. And that makes the matter a little bit more complicated. It makes the matter a little more problematic. It makes the matter not one of homosexuality exclusively. It makes it a matter of a male who's a so-called prostitute, but who's he fucking? Men, women, both? You didn't know that. And just what the hell is a shrine? We gotta look that word up. You see how those of you who like to just use King James, you see how you missed the boat? You see how your understanding of what the hell's going on is a little bit Let's go look at the word shrine. American Heritage Dictionary. Go to S's, got it right here for you. Shrine. 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 I thought I had it here for you. Oh, right here. Shrine. Shriner. Shrine. Shrine. A container or receptacle for sacred relics. A reliquary. The tomb of a saint or other venerated, that's religious, persons. A site hallowed or holy by a venerated object and its associations. Got it? To enshrine. See? So this word is a religious word, and a shrine is a container. It's a receptacle for sacred objects or sacred relics. Wow, wow, wow. We can put the American Heritage down. And when we go back to the NIV, a better version than the so-called KJV, it says they are male shrine prostitutes. Now we know a shrine is a receptacle for religious objects, religious relics. Male shrine, religious. And what it shows you also, if you want to go back now to the King James Version, that when it talks about there were sodomites in the land, it proves that this is a religious problem that's going on, not a sexual problem. It was a religious problem. And the problem for the Israelites and Judah was that these Judites, these Israelites, were worshiping the Sodomite religion and practicing the Sodomite ways. What were the Sodomite ways? When you look at the newer versions, you realize that the Sodomite ways had to do with male shrine prostitutes. And we know that prostitution has to do with sex. So what we can find out, what we now know, is that the men and the women of Judah were being fucked and sucked by male shrine prostitutes. I said the men, the Hebrew men, the Israelite men, the Jew men and women were being fucked and sucked as part of religious ritual and worship by the Sodomites. Who were the Sodomites? The Sodomites were male shrine sex workers that we call prostitutes. That's just one, that's one version. Are you learning something? This all goes back to Sodom and Gomorrah. That's the NIV. Let's go look at the Jerusalem Bible. Same scripture. What does the Jerusalem Bible? We are doing a compare and contrast with old King James Version to show you that when you read King James Version only, you are inept. You are weak and limp-dicked. You don't have the full gravity of the situation. You see sodomites and you just say homosexuals. Well, the newer versions simply call them male shrine prostitutes. And a male shrine prostitute can be a heterosexual man that's there in the service of the sodomite temple to fuck and suck women only. The male shrine prostitute can be bisexual, and he says, I'll sling dick in pussy and butthole. The male shrine prostitute can be homosexual. He says, I'm going to fuck the Israelite men that want to get fucked and sucked. I don't really like no pussy. It's open. It's ambiguous. You can't just label the Sodomites as homosexual when you read the advanced and better and greater and newer Bible translations that make it broad, that include the heterosexual and the bisexuality. Now let's go look at another translation, the Jerusalem Bible. The Jerusalem Bible. Let's go look and see how it interprets the Sodomites. Let's go see what it has to say about the Sodomites that are mentioned in the KJV, in the King James Version. Let's see what it says. It calls them, verse 24. Start by right here. They who had built themselves high places and had set up pillars and sacred poles. That's where the King James says groves. See, the groves are sacred poles. This is a bad translation, a mistranslation, and an outdated and an archaic and antiquated old-fashioned translation. They don't say groves in the newer translations. They say sacred poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. There were even men in the country who were sacred prostitutes. It doesn't say sodomites. It uses sacred prostitutes. And NIV, let me grab it again. It uses sacred prostitutes. Does that sound like homosexuality? No, it doesn't. A sacred prostitute could be whatever. Its sexual nature and sexual leanings and sexual proclivities are unknown. It's unknown. I said, the NIV, the New International Version, calls them male shrine prostitutes, which means that the sexual proclivities, their sexual leanings are ambiguous. You don't know if they're hetero, bi, or homo. It just says they're male shrine prostitutes. We don't know if these males are fucking only women. We don't know if these males are fucking men. We don't know if these males are fucking men and women. And in fact, they were fucking men and women. But their sexual proclivity, their sexual choice, what they like the most is not mentioned. It becomes ambiguous in this male shrine prostitutes from the NIV version. And then the Jerusalem version simply calls them sacred prostitutes. Again, very ambiguous. The sexual nature and sexual proclivities what they like to fuck and suck on is ambiguous. You don't know. They were simply sacred prostitutes. And how can they be sacred if they fucking and sucking for money? Let's talk about that real quick. Let's talk about that. You've heard the phrase oxymoron? Have you heard the phrase oxymoron? An oxymoron are two words that are dissimilar. Two words that are the very juxtaposition of one another. Two words that are the opposite of one another. Two words like right and left. They don't go together. A common oxymoron is the phrase freezing fire. How can fire be freezing? Fire is hot and freezing is cold. But there's an oxymoron called freezing fire. There's another oxymoron called deafening silence. How can something that's deafening, that means it's loud as fuck. It's so loud that it hurts your ears. It's deafening. Silence? Silence is, how can something be so loud yet so silent? That's the correct use of the phrase oxymoron. Now my YouTube nemesis, old struggle doctrine, he don't know what it means. He calls Hebrew Israelite an oxymoron. Hebrew Israelite is not an oxymoron because Hebrew and Israelite go together. As a matter of fact, the Bible dictionaries and encyclopedias say that Hebrew and Israelite are interchangeable. If they're interchangeable, then they cannot be a oxymoron. But that bitch nigga over there, struggle doctrine, trying to sound educated, trying to sound like he has a good grasp of grammar and grammatical words and grammatical phrases, he calls Hebrew Israelite, two words that are interchangeable, he calls them a oxymoron, totally misusing the phrase oxymoron. Oxymoron are two words that are just opposite. Like, how do you say those words together? What do you mean freezing fire? What do you mean deafening silence? Those are oxymorons. Google it. Google oxymoron examples. I guarantee you, if you Google oxymoron examples, freezing fire and deafening silence will be right up there on the list. And so we have an oxymoron right here in the Bible. How can a prostitute be sacred? Sacred is everything holy and righteous of God. Sacred is sacrosanct, without blemish or scar. Prostitute is everything licentious and lascivious and decadent and profligate about the use of sex. How can a prostitute be sacred? You see, how can a prostitute be sacred? How can a prostitute be holy and sacred? You know what it shows you? You know what it should tell you? You know what it should tell you? If you can think outside the box, it should let you know that that word prostitute ain't quite right. They are letting you know, and they are hinting to you by the word sacred that it's a religious practice. Do you agree with that? Sacred, these males, that they are indulging in a religious practice. Excuse me. The fact that the Bible, some of the newer translations call them sacred, is proof positive that the Bible writers knew that whatever was going on, it was of a religious nature. And then they come along and call them prostitutes, which only shows the Jews or the Hebrews or the Israelites' grammatical and ethnocentric bias. They were biased. They were biased in describing these sacred fellows, these beautiful men that were in the Goddess and the Sodomite temples. They recognized that what they were doing was performing a religious duty. But then they termed it and classified that duty as prostitution. It's an oxymoron, And by calling these sacred young men prostitutes, it shows us that the ancient Israelite writers understood that they were doing a religious function, yet they wanted to throw on them the yoke of something nasty and lascivious and licentious and sexually profligate. And so they called them prostitute. And as I said about 30 minutes ago, these people, these young men, they never looked at themselves as prostitutes. They didn't call themselves prostitutes. That was not the language of their religion. The language of the goddess, Asherah, the language of the Sodomites, Baal, and the rest of the gods, it never used the word prostitute to describe their temple activities and their temple functions. That's Israelite language. And as I said 30 minutes ago, outside of the Bible's polemic, outside of the Bible's argument and commentary on these sacred male workers, outside of the Bible, you will not find the word prostitute in any other nation's writings on the activities of the goddess or the sodomite. They will not be cast in that light. As far as the women were concerned, there were not just men so-called prostitutes, there were women so-called prostitutes by the Israelites. But the women had their own name. You know how the Catholics have nuns? I said the Catholics have nuns, right? Sisters and nuns. Well, the women that were in these temples, goddess, the women that were allowing their vaginas and their mouths and their assholes to be beaten up and used and abused as a way of showing love and veneration and adoration toward the deity, the Canaanite goddess Asherah. These women had a name. They had a name. And their name was called Qadishtu or Qadessa. And you could say that name translated over even for the young men who were sex workers in the Canaanite and in the Sodomite temple. They were part of a group of people known, they were, sex workers, but they were called the Qadessa or the Qadishtu. The Qadishtu. And what does the Qadishtu or the Qadessa mean in their language? Not the Jew language, not the Hebrew language, and not the Israelite language. What do the people who actually fucking and sucking in the temples, what do they call themselves? And what is the definition of what they call themselves? For that information, we go to when God was a woman. It's what I do, people. I want you to understand how those people saw themselves on the world stage. Not how other people saw them and interpret their religious practices. No, we've heard that all of our ignorant Christian and Israelite lives. Now let's see what they themselves, the women and men in those temples that were fucking and sucking, what they thought of themselves and what they called themselves. When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone. See, I do this. Page 157 Page 157. These so-called, let's get back, the so-called sacred prostitute, the language of the Jew, the language of the Israelite prostitute, call them stupid names like prostitute. See, another version calls them male shrine prostitutes. This is the language of the Israelites, not the language of those people themselves. Now let's go look at see what they say about themselves. We go to Merlin Stone's book. We go to Merlin Stone's book. I said we go to Merlin Stone's book, page 157. And it writes, the sacred sexual customs. Sexual customs? Sacred sexual? There is some of us would say that might be an oxymoron. How is sex sacred? But let's go on. The sacred sexual customs of the female religion, i.e. the goddess, offer us another of the apparent ties between the worship of the divine ancestress. You see that ESS? That means it's a female, a woman, a she, a her, a goddess, a creatress. Not ancestor. Ancestor is male. Ancestress is female. The worship of the divine ancestress or goddess. As it was known in Sumer, Sumer is where Abraham came from. Abraham understood and used to worship the goddess. Sumer, Babylon, Anatolia or Turkey, Greece, Carthage or North Africa, Sicily, Italy, Cyprus, and even Canaan. Canaan, where the Israelites would settle under Joshua. Women, here we go. Women, and men possibly too, but women who made love in the temples, hold on. What the fuck? They fucking in the temple? They fucking at church? They fucking at mass? They fucking at Juma prayer? They fucking at the masjid? They fucking at the mosque? They fucking at the temple? At the tabernacle? They fucking in the synagogue? Yes. They were fucking in church. Women who made love in the temple, church, mosque, synagogue, tabernacle were known. They were known in their own language as what? Sacred, not prostitutes. They were known as sacred women. The undefiled, something that's undefiled is without sin. The undefiled, you're not defiled. These women that were fucking in the temple were called the undefiled. Their Akkadian name, here it goes, Qadishtu. Some say Qadessa in other translations. Their Akkadian name, Qadishtu, is literally translated as sanctified women or holy women. See? That's how they viewed themselves. Motherfuck what the Jews, Hebrews, Israelites called them. They looked at themselves, the women that were doing the fucking and sucking, the men who were doing the fucking and sucking in the goddess religion and the Sodomite religion, they looked at themselves as sacred women and sacred men. They looked at themselves as the undefiled. They looked at themselves as sanctified women and sanctified men. They looked at themselves as holy women or holy men. That's a long way from your Judeo-Christian Hebrew Israelite look at the Sodomites in the KJV Bible. Why does not the King James Bible and other translations tell you how these people viewed themselves? These so-called male shrine prostitutes. These so-called male temple prostitutes. Where's my other? these so-called sacred prostitutes. You see how biased the language is when they call them prostitutes? But when you ask those people themselves, they'll tell you what we are doing. These people, these men and women, they are part of the religious body politic known as the Qadishtu. Known as the Qadishtu. Well, you ask me, what does the Qadishtu mean? It does not mean prostitute. It does not mean prostitute. It means sacred women, sacred men. It means the undefiled. It means sanctified women and sanctified men and holy women and holy men. It damn near should make you want to. Now that you know this, it damn near make you want to take your King James version of the Bible and burn that shit or throw it in the trash because it misrepresents another nation's religious practices. It demeans them and debases and disrespects a holy and sanctified people with a holy and sanctified practice. Now you might say in 2025, that's nasty. They was fucking in the church. They was doing homosexual acts and bisexual acts and heterosexual acts in the church. That's nasty. I would damn near agree with you, other than the fact that I'm aware that I am not in the position to judge another nation's understanding of the divine on its way to divinity. Did that go over your head? Did that go over your head? I said, I am not in the position in the year 2025 and beyond to play Monday morning armchair quarterback and sit back and cast aspersions on what people and how they understood God, the divine and divinity 3,000 years ago. I am in no moral position to do that. And anybody who understands evolution, whether from Charles Darwin or whatever, things evolve and things grow and things mutate and things transmogrify and things metamorphose. One thing becomes another over days and weeks and months and years and decades and centuries and millennia. Things never stay the same. And as it relates to the human mind and the brains, we grow and we evolve. We learn, our understanding becomes heightened. So what's really nasty to us, men and women fucking and sucking in the church, to us, it may sound super, super weird. But if you are a student of biblical studies, religious studies, if you're a student of psychology and sociology and mythology, you understand these people, and that's where they were at that time in human history, in their evolutionary journey to the divine. And you can't judge that. And anybody who tries to judge the practices of the Sodomites or the goddess, you're just intellectually, biblically, religiously, and spiritually untenable in my eyes. You're untenable. And so while the Jews and the Israelites and the Hebrews and the King James Bible wants to call these beautiful people, these beautiful Canaanites, these beautiful people, they weren't bad people. They were everyday people like the Sly and the Family Stones would sing. Everyday people, yeah. Sly and the Family Stone song, Everyday People. They weren't mean and rude and vile. I mean, the Sodomites, they used to be back in Sodom. Let me clear that up. 700 years ago, I said 700 years ago, the Sodomites were mean and rude and unhospitable and arrogant and stingy. 700 years later, they've acclimated and gotten into regular society. They're all around the Jews. But it is intellectually and scholastically insincere to label these people's religious practices as prostitution. It's religiously lazy and religiously and intellectually wrong to label what the goddess and what the sodomite were doing by using sex and sexual intercourse as worship and ritual. And again, Merlin Stone, again, let's go back to Merlin Stone. Merlin Stone, she makes this point. She makes this point about using that stupid word prostitute. She says, after she says, women who made love in the temples were known in their own language as sacred women, the undefiled. Their Akkadian name of Qadishtu, or Quadessa, is literally translated as sanctified women or holy women. Now let's get to her talking about why we shouldn't use prostitute or prostitution and how they've been using that shit for the last couple hundred years. She says, yet the sexual customs and even the most academic, that means college, academic college studies of the past 2 centuries or 200 years, the 19th and the 20th centuries, were nearly always described as prostitutes. In other words, when you go to college and you study about these ancient religions, all the colleges in the 19th and 20th century around the world, whether it's Harvard, Yale, Princeton, when they talked about this subject, they labeled those people as prostitutes. And for the last 200 years, they described them as prostitution. The sacred women repeatedly referred to as temple prostitutes or ritual prostitutes or sacred prostitutes or male temple prostitutes. See? Temple prostitutes or ritual prostitutes. Prostitutes. Now here it goes. The use of the word prostitute as a translation for Qadishtu not only takes away from the sanctity, the holiness of that which was held sacred. Their sex was sacred, but suggests by the inferences and social implications of the word an ethnocentric, as a bias, subjectivity on the part of the writer. It leads the reader, a lot of you ignorant motherfuckers, it leads the reader to a misinterpretation. When you see the words prostitute, temple prostitute, cult prostitute, it's a misinterpretation. And it makes you, the person that's reading it, who won't go and dig into the truth, it makes you understand, it makes you think something different. It's a misinterpretation of the religious beliefs of the Sodomites and the Canaanites and social structure of the Sodomites and the Canaanites of the period of that time. It seems to me that the word prostitute entirely distorts the very meaning of the ancient customs which the writer is supposedly explaining. Goddamn. Ooh-wee. This is some good stuff, y'all. Merlin Stone. That's one book on religion you should buy, read, and hold it sacred to your heart. Merlin Stone. She got it right. The use of the word prostitution, it entirely distorts the very meaning of what those people were doing. My goodness. Now going on, now that we've knocked that out the park, why would the Israelites, the Hebrews, or the Jews, why would they allow these so-called temple prostitutes to be in their vicinity? Why, oh why would they do that? What was it about the Sodomites and the goddess that they would allow these people to take up residency right there in the temple of Jerusalem? It got so bad that they were putting amulets and figurines and religious relics right inside of the Jewish, Hebrew, Israelite temples at Jerusalem. You mad at the Sodomites? You mad at the Canaanites? You mad at the goddess worshippers? You mad at the Asherah worshippers? Asherah's pole, I said Asherah's pole was right there in the temple at Jerusalem. If the Jews, if the Israelites, if the Hebrews were so against homosexuality, how and why do we find in human history a group of people that were known for fucking and sucking heterosexuals and bisexuals, a group of people that were even known for their homosexual religious activity? How and why do the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites allow these type of people and their type of adoration and veneration for their so-called false god? How do the Israelites allow them to get that close to the Holy of Holies, to the temple in Jerusalem, to the Ark of the Covenant, to the Levite priests? How do they do it? For in fact and indeed, the goddess Asherah and her pole, and the Sodomites' gods, Baal, and their sexual functions, they were dropping nut right on the property of the temple at Jerusalem. They were dropping semen stains right on the front lawn of the church at Jerusalem. How do these Israelite men allow these people to do that? I submit to you that the only way that the goddess Asherah and her pole, the Sodomites, Baal, and their ass fucking, their homosexual and bisexual and heterosexual sexual practices were able to go on so close and damn near in the temple at Jerusalem is because they themselves, the Israelites, were allowing that shit. They were allowing it. It got so bad and so out of hand that even the Queen Mother, King Asa's mother, fell victim to sodomite and goddess worship Even King Ahab, who would marry Jezebel, he would convert from the Yahweh religion and become a Baal and Asherah worshiper. Facts upon facts. Let's go to these scriptures. Let's go to these scriptures. They want to blame the Canaanites for their own sexual indiscretions. But when we go look at the history, 1 Kings 15, 1 Kings 14, 24, excuse me. No. 1 Kings 15 and 12. Look at this. The only way that the goddess Asherah and the Sodomites, the sacred so-called male prostitutes, the homosexual male prostitutes, the bisexual male prostitutes, so-called, the heterosexual male prostitutes, the women of the Qadishtu, the sacred holy women, the undefiled, the only way they could be all up in Israelite business, Israelite religion, Israelite customs, the only way they could be all around the church at Jerusalem, the only way they could set up idols and relics and trinkets and amulets and statues in Jerusalem is that Israel had to be complicit. The children of Israel, the nation of Israel, the people of Israel, those goddamn Hebrews, they had to be complicit. Their hands had to be in the pot to allow another nation to run their sexual shit right through their goddamn temples. And I submit to you that the goddess religion and the Sodomite religion was at the highest offices of Israelite worship ritual. I said the goddess religion and the Sodomite religion was being maintained, upheld, worshipped, stamped of approval at the highest levels of Israelite society, of Israelite government. That's how these so-called faggots can be all up in the temples in Jerusalem. Because you had the highest, you had the kings and the queens. You had the leaders of Jewish, of Hebrew, of Israelite society engaging in Asherah pole worship and Sodomite ass fucking. That's how the Sodomites got in like Flint. And it got so goddamn bad that when a new king rose, Asa, the son of King Solomon, he had had enough of the Sodomite religion and of the goddess. He drove them out the land. He made them get their shit and get on down the road. 1 Kings 15. 1 Kings 15, starting with verse 9. And in the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, reigned Asa over Judah. So Judah was the king over this tribe. Asa was the king over this tribe, Judah. And 41 years reigned he in Jerusalem. See, Asa was the king of Judah, and Asa ruled from Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Maachah, the daughter of Abishalom. And Asa did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, as did David his father. Really, David was his grandfather. No, David was his father. You're right. David's father. What did he do? What did he do that was right in the eyes of David? And he took away the Sodomites out of the land, and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. See, if this second part wasn't there, you might could say this was about homosexuality. And he took away the homosexuals out of the land. You might could say that. But now we know that the better translations call these simply male prostitutes or sacred male prostitutes. And when they become male prostitutes or sacred, you can't just classify them as homosexual. You can't. They're just male prostitutes. But the reason we know that King Asa would take away the Sodomites out of the land, it wasn't because they were homosexual. And the reason we know that is when we get to the comma and the rest of the sentence. And removed all the idols. Idols are religious imagery. So the Sodomites were a religious group that had religious imagery or idols all up in Jerusalem. You can't make this about homosexuality and then the rest of the sentence is talking about religion. No, the Sodomites were a religion. A religion that was doing big numbers amongst the Israelites. And so King Asa took away the Sodomites out of the land and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. Check this out. And also the queen, his mother, Maacah, his mother, Asa the king, removed from being the queen. He dethroned his mother. Well, why did he dethrone his mother? Why did Asa make his mother take off her royal diadem and her crown? Why did he? Why? Because his mother, the queen, had made an idol, religious imagery, in a grove. We know the word grove means Asherah. Asherah is the goddess of the Canaanites. Asherah is a pole. Asherah is a Canaanite Asherah pole. A grove. A grove is a pole from Asherah. And Asa, the son and the king of Judah, destroyed his mother, Maacah, destroyed her idol, her goddess Asherah pole, which they call a grove, but we know her idol was an Asherah pole, and burnt it by the brook Kidron. It's already time for me to go, and I got so much more. This is 19, y'all. You see why you can't talk about Sodom and Gomorrah and not take the shit all the way to the nth degree. So now we know. As we close on this part, now we know. Now we know that when we read grove in the Bible, groves, it's talking about the goddess Asherah and her pole. We got that from part 17, 18. But what we really know on this part 19 is that when you look at newer translations, better translations than the King James Version of the Bible, who simply calls those worshipers, those people, Sodomites, and because we have already been ingrained and indoctrinated and brainwashed to believe that all Sodomites are homosexuals, we leave it there. But when we look at the advanced translations, the NIV, the Jerusalem Bible, the Oxford Bible, and other Bibles, they shed light on what a sodomite is, and they don't even use the word sodomite. They use words like sacred male prostitutes, male prostitutes, sacred prostitutes, sacred male prostitutes. And when you switch the language from simply Sodomites, which has an air of homosexuality with it, when you switch that word out and you put male prostitutes, then it becomes ambiguous, because you don't know the sexual orientation of the male prostitute. They could be heterosexual, they could be bisexual male prostitutes, or they could be homosexual male prostitutes. And I submit to you that they were all three. Whatever the Israelites wanted sexually, they could get from the goddess and from the Sodomite religion. And that's why the goddess and the Sodomites were allowed to proliferate and expand and grow. We want to blame them. And we want to gloss over the Israelites worshiping of the goddess and the Sodomite. The goddess and the Sodomite, they hadn't been doing nothing different. They were doing the sex thing a millennia, since time immemorial, before the Jews, the Israelites, or the Hebrews ever were a nation. Before Joshua brought them into the land of milk and honey, into the land of Canaan. The Canaanites, the goddess, and the Sodomite have been doing the do sexually. It was the Jews, the Hebrews, and the Israelites who come into a stranger's country, a stranger's land, and try to upend their religious style of worship. It was the Israelites that had the problem, not the Canaanites and not the Sodomites. Part 19, and we out. Peace. Come back for part 20.